I wouldn't know because again I'm gonna take an informed guess at this because we had conversation with Nike and you know and similar to that is that with Mercedes, like it's a similar. I mean, a car obviously costs more than a shoe, but they own the production, so in that sense they're the same. So I think one of the reasons why digital has not really caught on yet, but you're seeing that like now. I recently saw an interview by somebody, chief of product development in Reebok, that they're investing in 3D printing technologies for their soles. I think that's because like the technology has crossed a certain cost threshold, that it, at least in small runs of 1,000 shoes or something, they're beginning to see viability. So, and then the other thing is like it is offsetting costs of putting stuff in storage, which is a big cost. Like that's why you have all of these Amazon Black Friday deals, which are half the cost, mostly because like storage is such a large part of retail price. And so I think it will catch on, like, and it will, like, you know, already Nike has a computational design team that, strangely enough, like a few times that we used to go to Pasadena, like arts college and so, and we see our buildings on their students' posters and so on, and so I think they're now seeing a reverse influence between from architecture onto product design and industrial design, and when the economics works out, like I think they're gonna see it's a bit like craft beer, right? Like, I mean, eventually the economics is gonna work out, and what's gonna happen is like every craft brewery is gonna be bought up by like the big brewing companies. So it's but like, yeah, it will be short runs, like so. A craft beer doesn't exist on the market for 10 years. It's there for 6 months, and then it's some other name and a different flavor and so on. So I think when the economics works out, it's gonna catch on. And the other thing is, like, I think for a very long time, like education, there have not been that many people other than the Bauhaus. Like, there's not been a kind of Bauhaus-like place, I suspect, in the product design, which was like widely accepting of different professions. With most of the material and hardware technologies, A, we don't have the expertise, B, we don't have the space, and C, we are in the heart of London, where it's always more economical to put people than machines in the same space, and more productive. So we take the position of like watching what the industry does and try to make a context for it in our designs. So that's at least our explicit motivation, like, let's say. So we do a lot of collaboration and collaborative prototyping so that we hands-on know how to draw the things for that technology. So like recently we did this collaboration with Block Research Group and Alicia's company of getting knit formwork built in Mexico, and our interest in that is like obviously not the technology. our interest is how can we design something that expresses and highlights that technology best, so that the next time we're drawing a competition or something, and we say we're going to use this technology, it looks like that technology can actually be used. So there's a correspondence. So for example, with timber, if you say you're going to use timber and like there is no correspondence between the shape that you draw and what timber can do, then immediately you don't need to be an engineer. Like anybody can say like, you know, these things is mismatched. So we don't want that. And so we want to design things that are appropriate and natural to the technology. So if we say we're going to 3D print in concrete, like we develop a language that highlights the layer by layer nature of printing. Or if we say we're going to use sheet metal manufacturing, we develop a language that highlights the creases or the folds. If we say we're going to use fabric, we highlight where the seams are going to be, and like we develop a language based on that, and so on. So same with like robots. We see an application in as much as that it informs our designs. Whether it's going to be on-site or off-site is not, it's not a question I think we can answer. I've been privy to some conversations with like experts in industry, like saying on-site robotics is like a completely other beast, because it's unstructured environments, like temperature changes, and like then you have to localize your robot, and then computation becomes very, very expensive, like because you cannot carry a big behemoth computer on site, like if you have a mobile robot and so on. Like so it's I don't know who it was in Robark, like the keynote lecture was very interesting. He said like the best example of on-site robotics is shipbuilding by humans. And like, you know, because they're localizing themselves, and so that I don't know, but like what's interesting is that it does inform a certain aesthetic, and that we are very much interested in. What does the aesthetic and the language of robotic fabrication look like? What is the kinds of tolerances? Is it like super pristine, precise? So far, no robotic fabrication process has shown to be precise. So which means it's not a problem with that. Like it just, we have to design for that precision. Like, and so the idea that robotic fabrication is zero tolerance is a kind of motivation, sure, but like right now it's not zero tolerance. It's like actually more tolerance than manual production, right? Like so how do you develop a language that is appropriate for that? That's our interest. Yeah. So in that sense, we're very much excited by robotic fabrication, and most digital fabrication we're excited by because it is programmable. Anything that's programmable, we're interested in. Yeah. It's with any technology, I think this is going to be a question for society, right? Like, should society invest in cathedrals, or should society invest in building 10 houses or 100 houses for the same price? And the answer to that I don't think is black and white, and the answer to that I don't think is either pyramidal. It's not that like once you build 100 houses, then you can build a cathedral. Like I think there's a necessity for both, obviously, and the necessity for cathedrals is like often underestimated. And when I say cathedral, I don't mean it religiously. Like I just mean like as a public social space. That, you know, the Beijing Olympics, for example, like I was there and I could see that it transformed like the nation from a nation of doubters to like a nation of believers. Like you like that, hosting that one event and putting on a show, and it was a fantastic transformation. And since then you can see like China like just skyrocketed in most of the indices, let's say. And So again, I don't see it as like black and white and oppositional. Like I think they're synergetic. So many of the things that, like when you design a cathedral, let's say, or cathedral-like things, you pay attention to different kinds of things, as opposed to when you design for mass production and for the very hundreds and hundreds of high volume, right? Like, so there's a balance between low volume, high cost, and high volume, low cost things, and I don't think it will be either or. That will be kind of generally catastrophic if you have only boring stuff, you're never aspiring to anything amazing. And imagine a society of people who are like not aspiring to greatness, and that would be like a terrible thing. And at the same time, it could also be that like a society becomes so decadent that they only aspire for luxury. And yeah, I think everyone can have access to it by as a society, us deciding that we should invest in both, and then there will be every gradation in between. Design is like is more a thought process, I think. Like in many ways, like yeah, we consider ourselves like very good architects. Not it doesn't mean that like we think that like no one else can make like the designs that we do. Like it's just that we think like we ask the right questions. So it's not like our expertise is not embedded so much in the product. It's in the way we think of design, and like we try to foreground design and champion it, and not to think of design as a bonus, which is usually the case. It's always like somehow like yeah, you have to think of design after all the basic pyramidal things are taken care of. Like we don't think of it like that. We think of design as integral and necessary part of people's lives. Like and so in that sense, yeah, we can design. It's not the same size fits all, right? Like I mean, if we are designing for a certain economic bracket, like that's one thing, and if you're designing for a different culture, that's another thing. And I think computational design in many ways broadens your client base and who you can address. It doesn't narrow it at all. Like I think like I don't see at all, or at least in many ways we believe the reason at least I got interested in Philippe Bloch's work and is because parametric design can exist in a wide spectrum. You know, he was building shells in like Rwanda, and like he also built shells for the Venice Biennale. So these are not oppositional, and like and that's how we see design also. Like just because we are making like a 300-story tower doesn't mean we won't take on a commission that doesn't require that high technology of material, but it will still embed the same thinking. I mean, there are projects that we have worked on, which I cannot say where they are, but like School for Refugee Children and so on, which we spent exactly the same time and the same design process to design that as we did like a gallery for mathematics. So once you think of design as a search process and as integral to delivering use value, I think like the question mutates very much like how can you operate in a spectrum between the two, like not A versus B. It's like from A to B, like how many different variations can you produce. The way things have transpired, like digital design and fabrication, for some reason, like was very strong in like the 60s and 70s. Like, you know, there were places like Cambridge and people like Christopher Alexander and Lionel March and others, like investing heavily into the use of computers and how do you even represent architecture in such a way that the computers can understand. Like they try to recreate Palladian villas and Corbusier's plans and so on. And so it's not that like we're doing something new. It's just that like after that period of 60s and 70s, there were like this severe backlash against that process, and then it deviated into all kinds of places which became much more plural. So now when we think about, it's been 20 years since maybe 1995, let's say at least in the UK, it was the turn of the millennium was like a big moment. Foster and Partners, like the British Museum, the Millennium Bridge, the Millennium this, Millennium that, like, and that was like, in many ways, like the, there was like the financial backing for like a lot of these innovations to come in again. So it's been almost 20 years, and then how do we make it mainstream, I think, is to ask better questions. Ask not only how to make it material efficient or how to make it economical, but like how is this relevant to a person's lifestyle? What is the social value of these technologies, and how you can incorporate it into making the most people happier for most of the time. And I think, so that's where any other previous technology that has become disruptive has like asked that kind of question, like it's to become mainstream, like to like digital cameras, like, and the revolutionary change happens, and then after a while, like the production process becomes so cheap that like it can become useful in everyday life. Like, and that's when it really changes, and like, so we can continue to push the boundaries technologically, like we have like better, faster machines and more efficient, less energy consuming and so on. Those are all very important steps to do, but also as architects, at least we think we should ask the social questions, like, because we don't have the capacity to be engineers or scientists, but we can definitely understand how to use all of these things and make it relevant in an architectural context, in the way people use spaces. And so it's last 3-4 years, like that's what like at least our group has been specifically shifting towards, to say like there's all this cutting edge research happening in all over the world. We as a architecture practice embedded group, we should try and make an avenue, make projects, make a use case for all of these technologies to be applicable, to be commercialized, to become mainstream and so on. And yeah, so that's why we are kind of beginning to be, for the last year or so, become interested in housing. Not only like social housing in the way it is known from the 60s and 70s onwards, but generally also urban living, urban densification. These are all bigger pertinent questions, and we think like digital fabrication and digital design have a massive role to play in this. Not only mass housing, not the 10,000 house problem. It's like the 15, 20 houses that need to be built quickly and then move on to the next site and so on. Like it's those kind of urban problems where we think first digital design and digital fabrication will have the greatest impact. Because if you want to make 10,000 houses, it's not digital fabrication, it's mass production. It's like the kind of automobile production that will always win. Yeah, so I think it's about asking and situating technologies in the right way, in the right use context, so that it becomes more mainstream. Because right now, a regular person on the street doesn't care for digital design or digital fabrication or 3D printing or robots until such point that they do care. It's not going to be mainstream.